Hey, what's up, everybody? CFB Dynasty podcast, first one of 2022. It's me and my boy Zach Tao here. What's up, Zach? How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
So today we'll be talking about this list that I've built. The top 300 quarterback performances in college fantasy football dating back to 1980, the last time Georgia won a national championship. So, from championship to championship for the Georgia Bulldogs, we'll go through the top 10. I'm added up to the screen here. This is on cfbdynasty.com. We'll post a link out to this full post when it's completed, along with this data that you can play with. You can export, you can search for names and see who's in the top 300 here. And we will go through the top 10 at the end. But let's just start out with a little quick why did we do this and who is CFB Dynasty. So CFB Dynasty is a college fantasy football site. We're all passionate about fantasy football and college football in general. So we provide rankings throughout the year, and we've got an algorithm launching very soon where we've went through it all 2021, working with some developers to have a real-time data-backed prediction based on current data, based on the weather, all kinds of things to help spit out an accurate or as close to accurate as possible projection of fantasy points per game for every player in college football to help you set your DraftKings, to help you set your FanDuel, or just your standard college fantasy football lineup, which I love and means a lot to me to win, especially my home league. But yeah, Zach, quick introduction about yourself, and then we will get right to it.
All right. Yeah, I'm Zach Tao. I've been in college fantasy, call it business, whatever you want to call it, for probably 8 to 10 years, officially, unofficially, whatever. I ran a site. I was CFF News. Don't have the time to do that anymore, so I kind of stepped away from it in that sense. But I definitely keep up with all of it still. But there's plenty of good resources. CFB Dynasty is pretty awesome, really. Like when you approached me about it, like I started looking at all the data that you had. And I'm thinking, man, this is really way more in depth than I have ever really gone. So it'll be really cool to see how when the projection models and stuff all get built out and everything, how cool that's going to be. But yeah, I've been around for a little while, just kind of behind the scenes more so.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So quickly on the scoring system. So we've compiled all the data, and it was perfect timing for me. It was after, in-laws left after Christmas break. It was the first weekend that I had to myself. I've got kids and whatnot. So got all this data compiled and then did some formulas to calculate fantasy points. So in this data, it is important to note, we didn't factor in sacks or interceptions. This is purely just based on all of the passing yards, rushing yards, passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, etc. And all of the data is here and available. The other kind of cool thing that I wanted to do, and as you dive into any of the data and look at things, so this stat all the way to the right is what percentage of their fantasy points came from passing, so that we could really gauge how are dual threat quarterbacks trending, how are they trending over time, how are they trending by decade. And what we want to know from you guys is what questions you have. Like, that kind of question is awesome to see. All right, and I'll pull over screen.
Hey Brian, before you go any farther with this, so when that whole percentage thing, I find it very interesting that there are probably about a dozen guys that have over 100% of their points being from passing stats. So meaning they had negative rushing yards.
That's true. Um,
But it's actually kind of cool because then you truly know like those guys are just strict passers, and then you look at the names, you're like, yep, those guys didn't do a whole lot of running.
Yeah, and it's fun to see, and you can see in fantasy football how quarterbacks are trending. So I'll pull this over. This is just one. Just got a few other tabs with pivot tables there. I'll blow it up here a little bit. But for those of you who are listening on the pod, it's more you can just see how quarterbacks are becoming increasingly valuable in fantasy points per game from 1980 to 2021, as you would assume. You can see quarterback points per game going up and running backs going down. There's some fun stuff. So we'll be launching running backs and wide receivers here in the coming weeks. But running backs, oh, it's so fun seeing some of these old names. And it's the same with quarterbacks. So you think of, you know, John Elway. He didn't quite make the list. Eli Manning for Ole Miss didn't quite make the list. Elway was 433rd. Eli was 453. And what we did and how we ranked this was by fantasy points per game because, we obviously play more games than we used to. So if you want to
Right.
see it just by points, hey, send us a comment and we'll build the data. It's fun for us. Who
Nice.
are some of the names, Zach, that stand out to you on the list that you might have had on a past fantasy team or just amazing NFL career, whatever?
Well, I, of course, immediately searched for Kellen Moore, where he stood on this list. And he is on the list at 249th, with 101.91% of his points being from passing stats. So that's cool. Another one was Omar Jacobs. I don't know if you guys remember him from the Bowling Green days back in 2004. You can pull it up here on the thing. But he was ranked 38th all time with 33.3 points per game. And if you look at those stats, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a little product before
41 and 4.
most people really got into college fantasy. But those are the type of seasons that inspired people to say, you know what? There needs to be a college fantasy football. Because if I had that guy, I wouldn't lose, right? Like those are the ones where before you ever played college fantasy, there was always a player where you're like, man, I wish you could do that because your NFL team could use a quarterback like that, right?
Right.
Because I will never forget there was Case Keenum. As a matter of fact, I don't even know where he is on this list.
Yes.
I know he's on here.
Keenum, I've got it
Yeah.
noted down. So
Keenum was on there 3 times. Keenum's top 70 3 times. But I remember a guy that a coworker, and he was like, man, I wish there was college fantasy football because that Keenum guy is just destroying people. I was like, well, as a matter of fact, there is. And I got him into a league, and he lucked into the first pick. Like, I think it was like 09. And of course, he took Keenum, and he won the league because, well, he had Case Keenum. But it's just funny that, like, when you see seasons like that, it like, especially if you've never played college fantasy, it makes you think like, man, that'd be really cool to have. But yeah, as far as other guys that jumped out to me though, Jordan Lynch, obviously I had him on a team, and he was just so unstoppable. Mainly because he was his rushing ability, because only 43% of his points came from passing. He was an absolute tank. I don't know if you remember him or not, but like I had him on a team, and it just felt like he would throw for 200, run for another 150, 4 touchdowns every week. It was like, God, this guy's a monster. Mariota was cool. I like Mariota, but again, a lot more people kind of knew about Mariota. Lefevre, Dan Lefevre was another one. He's ranked, where is he at? 34th? Oh, yeah. Same way kind of with Lynch. a lot of rushing stats, but their passing stats were pretty good. Yeah, Lynch and Lefevre right there 5 times on this list. My goodness gracious.
That's
But those
nuts.
are the ones that really kind of jump out to me, just that I
Yeah,
remember personally having on my rosters.
some others that are just fun to see, fun names to see. So Ryan Leaf came in at 194. A lot of people remember the debate, Ryan Leaf or Peyton Manning for the first pick in the draft.
Yeah.
Speaking of Peyton, he's on. He's had a few seasons on here, but I am from Gainesville. I'm a big Florida Gators fan, so I love that Peyton Manning is one spot behind Danny Werfel. Um, Danny's at 223, Peyton's at 224, and if you don't know, Peyton never beat Florida. So that's one of our favorite stats in
Also,
Gainesville.
just a fun fact. I don't know if a lot of people know this or not. I live in Memphis, or I'm from Memphis. I'm not a Memphis fan really, but I have a lot of friends that are, and they've told me this, and I thought it was wild, and it's true. A Manning has never won in the Liberty Bowl. Peyton or Eli have lost every time they've played there. Actually, I think Archie never won there either.
Reminds me of one of my favorite Steve Spurrier quotes. You can't spell citrus without UT, because that's where Peyton was always playing. But he was obviously amazing in college.
Yeah,
Steve Young is one of my favorite NFL quarterbacks of all time. He's on the list twice from BYU, which BYU is on here quite a
there's a
few
lot of
times.
BYU. I think BYU holds like 15 of the 300 spots.
Yeah, 292 and 28 for Steve Young. Another fun one. Let's see, Jim McMahon, another BYU quarterback. This is the oldest one that's ranked from
1980.
1980. He had the 21st season of all time.
And that's in an era where passing wasn't as prevalent like as
It's
it
true.
is today. I mean, yeah, certain offenses did it, but like as a whole, like college football now, or heck, football in general now is passing. It's a passing sport anymore. So the fact that he had that kind of season with 90% of his points coming from passing, that's pretty incredible.
It is incredible. So Dante Culpepper, going down memory lane, he's on the list a few times. He went to my high school here in Ocala, Florida, and he had a celebrity game one year, which Randy Moss came to, Edger and James, and Randy Moss came in this massive blacked out bus. That was a fun game. Just it's fun watching him and Randy Moss, obviously back in the day, which I'm excited to see where Moss ranks. What from his Marshall days.
I'm
Julian
interested. Yeah,
Edelman.
running
Julian
back
Edelman
receivers.
makes the list at 182. A lot of people don't remember he was a quarterback in college.
Yeah.
Um,
So, real quick question. I don't know if I've even asked you this. When you do running backs, receivers, how deep are we planning on going? Because
uh,
quarterbacks is 300. I feel like you could go to 1,000 if you wanted to. With
and we could push it on the website, however big people want, so that they can have the data to play with it. So, yeah, like I'm down to go as
I'm not
deep
suggesting we
as you
do it. I was
think.
just asking. Like, running backs and receivers are so many great
There
ones.
are,
Like,
yeah.
you could go. I think going deeper than 300, even just to 500, would be kind of nice.
Some others, Cliff Kingsbury, he's on the list at
Oh
number
yeah.
179. I'll just throw some names out there
How
that
many
everyone's
Texas
heard.
Tech quarterbacks are on this list?
Oh, let's see.
Um,
Texas Tech, yeah,
I'm
we
looking at
find
it here in a second. 1, 2, 3,
nine,
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. They
nine
hold
in the top
9 of the
300.
top 300 seasons,
Yep,
and they're all in the 2000s.
yep, that's crazy. Um, but yeah, Cliff got him started in 2002 and then coached him up
Yeah,
with old
obviously
Mahomes.
Mahomes
Hit the
tops the
list a few
list.
times. Yeah. Big Ben's on the list at 297, Dak 122, Philip Rivers 255. Drew Brees made the list twice from his days at Purdue. One of my favorites from early on, and it's so funny. Everyone who plays with the list will probably be looking for different people. GJ Kinney for me from 2010. Had him on my fantasy team back like early on when I was getting started, and he was awesome at Tulsa. Those offenses they had back in the day
Oh
were
yeah.
just killer.
I think another offense we got to talk about, and I hate to do it because on my 2 pods that I did recently, we talked about Hawaii, but goodness, they
Yeah,
have almost as many, maybe just as many as Texas Tech. I think it's 9, right?
9. Yep.
Yeah, they have 9 also. But man, like those guys, like honestly, I completely forgot about was it Moniz?
Yeah. Yep.
Like I completely forgot about him, but he was in there. But that was like a plug and play offense at that
It
time.
was. It was. I
Like,
mean, back to Timmy Chang, like, and now he's the head coach now, which
yeah,
is awesome. But like, yeah, that's when I
you went from
started.
Chang to Brennan.
Yep.
Well, hold on. You had Rolovich first. Then you went Chang, Brennan, Moniz, and then Cole McDonald was a little later. Like they had that gap. They had that Norm Chow gap.
That's right.
But
Um,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cool list. I didn't think I'd be as intrigued by it as I am. Like just looking through it, like it's pretty cool. Like to see these names that you've kind of forgotten about, but have become like they were so instrumental to like probably any championships you won, or whoever won in your league. Like
Totally.
they probably had a lot of these players, so it's
Those are
pretty
the
cool to see.
things those are the things you remember. If there's a painful story, which I definitely have some painful
Oh,
stories
there's plenty.
on this list, it
Denard
would be
Robinson probably wrecked me in multiple leagues.
it's Mackenzie Milton for me, where he got hurt in the first quarter of what was the fantasy championship game.
Oh,
Um, and then that was his last game at UCF, and obviously went on to FSU after that. But oh, that was a crusher for me, which obviously lost me the championship.
I'm not gonna
Um,
lie. I didn't realize Culpepper had such great seasons. Like, yeah, they're good seasons, but like in context to these others, like I would have never thought he'd have a top 300 season all time.
yeah.
And he
Another
has
thing
two
that's
of, and he
kind
has
of
two of them.
another thing that you can see here as we're looking at UCF players that's fun is you could do different filters with the conference as they've changed over time.
Yeah,
UCF, it's funny seeing them as an independent back then. But
Joe
yeah,
Webb, Joe Webb from UAB, 50th. He's number 50. What a
um,
tank.
so let's get to our top 10 here, and this is really what was part of the inspiration is the guy that's in at number 10, Bailey Zappi. The season that he had this year, 62 touchdowns. I was just thinking like, all right, where would this rank all time? So that's where,
That's where the
you start the
list
list.
was
That's
created, right?
where the curiosity came from. So
Yeah.
I could see, yeah, Cam Newton here at 19, Andre Ware, Sean King, Joe Burrow at 15, Kyler Murray at 14, Hurts at 10. Tebow's on the list 3 times. His best was number 12. BJ Simons we've talked
That's
about, but
wild.
yeah, Bailey
It's
Zappi.
crazy to me that Zappy's number 10.
I know.
Like,
62 touchdowns, but he had 38.6 fantasy points per game. But if you did the list a little differently and just filtered by fantasy points, he's up there a little higher, obviously.
yeah, he's up at what, 5, I think, if you do that. But even then, though, like, he had 96% of his points from passing stats. So, makes
Yep.
sense. Like, you have a lot more to make up. Whereas other guys on this list, you look and you're like, okay, yeah, they ran a little bit more.
which we debate that when we're doing rankings and everything like that. And we'll be launching ours here in the spring, our early 2022 rankings. We debate that a lot, and it's always like, oh, the default favorite or the you favor the dual threat. And yeah, dual threats are great. But when you get the right guy in the right offense and he's a pocket passer, just as good or better. It's
Right.
really sometimes just as reliable because if you get a guy that's running a read option offense and the defense is in the control at that point where they can force it to the running back if they want to.
Yeah.
um, how about number 9? So you've talked about him some, Jordan Lynch. You had him on your teams back in the day.
Yes, sir. That guy, I'm telling you, you look at his numbers in that season, 2,892 passing yards, nothing really spectacular. 1,900 rushing yards.
Yep.
Are you kidding me?
23 rushing touchdowns, and it's so funny the jump from 96% of the points and Bailey Zappi going to passing 39.5% Jordan Lynch.
It was like when you had him, you knew it was like having another running back on your team, but you knew he was going to throw a little bit too.
Right.
Like it's not like an option quarterback where the option quarterback's going to run. He might hit you with 2 or 3 passes, right? Like Lynch truly was like just you can say dual threat, but like man, he built like a fullback
Right.
that could throw the ball.
Coming in at number 8, Chase Clement from Rice, Conference USA. He played in 13 games, averaged 39.1 points per game, which was
Jeez.
just a 10th higher than Jordan Lynch. 44 passing touchdowns, 7 picks, 693 rushing yards, and 12 rushing touchdowns. 72% of his fantasy points came from passing. So he's in the middle there of Zappe and Lynch, where you've got the 3 extremes. You've got Clement, who's true dual threat, Lynch, who really favored running, and then Zappe, who didn't run hardly at all.
To be honest,
17
I
rushing
don't
yards.
remember him as much as most of these other guys.
Yep. 2008. He was great, and I
I
think
mean,
he threw. If you remember, I think he threw. I could have the years mixed. James Casey, who was a tight end, who did it all. He ran. He caught so many balls, and he was that first tight end, at least when my home league started back in the early
I'll
2000s.
tell you what, 2008 would have been the year that I did with a lot of my friends. Like we did a P5 only, so it's very possible that I didn't follow him.
Yep.
I remember the name. I just don't really remember him having such a great season, but obviously he did.
He did, yeah. And I'm gonna see. I'll check the James Casey quickly to see if my years are correct. But this Rice website's taking forever. So, yep, it was 2008.
Nice.
This tight end had 6 rushing touchdowns, 13 receiving touchdowns. Also did punt returns, threw a few passes. It was wild. Maybe we'll do tight ends. I don't know if the people are interested in tight ends or not, but shoot us a
Well,
comment if
it'd
you
be
are.
interested to see, like, I'd be interested to see, like, where some of these, like, big names in the NFL ranked. Like, where Travis Kelce's collegiate seasons were. Like, were they really any good, or was he just a kind of an average tight end that turned into a beast in the NFL? Like, Kyle Pitts. Like, where does Kyle Pitts rank all time in tight end seasons, right? Like, I think it'd be interesting to do. Maybe, like, top 100 or something.
Yeah, we'll build it and
Yeah.
check it
But
out.
anyway, on to the next
Number
one.
7. Yeah, Texas Tech, Patrick Mahomes. This is his
Machine.
2016 season, 39.4 fantasy points per game, 5,000 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, 10 picks, and then 12 rushing touchdowns. Only 285 rushing yards, but hey, the touchdowns are where it's at. 78 and a half, basically 79% of his points came from passing.
Yeah, I think everybody listening, watching us, knows who Patrick Mahomes is.
Yep, exactly. And then number 6, if you played in fantasy, this was you know,
Woo.
this was probably year 3 or so of my home league when I first got started, but Colt Brennan comes in at number 6 from Hawaii. From the WAC, he averaged 39 and a half fantasy points per game, had a total of 553 fantasy points that season in 14 games, 5,500 passing yards, 58 touchdowns, 12 picks. That was 58 touchdowns through the air. He added 5 more on the ground. 88% of his points. If
Man.
you've watched, you're not surprised. 88% of his points came from passing.
Oh yeah, NCAA '07 was a game with Colt Brennan. I'll tell you.
Yep. And really, I'm obviously a Gator fan, Tebow fan. He's awesome, but the number 5 season here is extremely impressive to me. So 2012, Johnny Manziel from Texas A&M. This is back when defenses in the SEC were dominant. Like LSU was great, Alabama obviously was great, and the SEC West is still really good, but
Mhm.
defenses were better. And he put up 39.7 fantasy points per game.
That's surprising to me.
Yep.
Like he had a great season. He was a Heisman Trophy winner. All that, but like when you actually put the numbers in context to all of these other great seasons, I would have never guessed he was top 5. Never.
It makes sense for Colt Brennan and Patrick Mahomes. Like those
Right.
conferences didn't really play defense. But yeah, back in the height of SEC defense, Johnny
Yep.
Manziel putting up almost 40 fantasy points a game. That's
Right.
nuts.
Yep.
But yeah, 26 passing touchdowns, 21 rushing touchdowns, and 48% of his
Hmm.
fantasy points came from passing. Number 4, no surprise to anyone. Most that I talk to consider him the best college fantasy player ever. He was the obvious number 1 pick going into fantasy drafts in 2017. Lamar Jackson, 521 fantasy points in 13 games, averaged 40.1, threw for 3,600 yards, 27 touchdowns, 10 picks, and then he added 1,600 rushing yards, 18 more touchdowns for a total of 48%, just like Johnny Manziel, same number. 48% of his fantasy points came through the air.
That's
Um,
it's truly remarkable the season he has, and the crazy part is that's not even his best season.
right.
And we'll get to that.
Right. We will. Um, Number 3, De'Aaron King from Houston. 2018 was when he put up 40.2 points, just a tenth of a point higher than Lamar Jackson's 2017 season. Had 2,900 passing yards, 36 touchdowns, and only 6 picks.
But he was
He was the lowest amount of picks for anyone in our top 10.
when you compare him to Lamar Jackson though, like his Derek King's production was truly touchdown based.
Yep.
Like when you look at his yards, they don't even match up to Lamar Jackson at all.
Right.
But they had 9 more passing touchdowns. That's a lot of points.
Yep. And 1,000 less rushing yards almost.
Right. So it was
Yeah.
truly I don't say touchdown dependent, but like his season was capped off by having 50 touchdowns total.
It's true. All right. So we have a tie at number 1 in fantasy points per game, which freaked me out. So I had to go back, do a little research. 1990, I was 5. So I was already into sports very much, but I didn't remember the name David Klingler, another guy from Houston. He went on to be the first pick in the draft by the Bengals, and he was a bust. He holds the record for touchdown passes in a game for a college football player with 11. I mean, it'd be hard to do that. Maybe on the NCAA video game, which can't wait till that actually comes out again. But anyways, David Klingler, 11 touchdowns in one game. He threw 54 in 1990, 5,100 yards, but 20 picks. So he threw it a lot and one rushing touchdown. So 97% of his points came through the air. And if we had a tiebreaker between him and our number one guy, he would lose if we actually calculated negative points for throwing picks. Do you have any recollection? How old were you in 1990?
I was born in 1990.
That's awesome.
So, but I do remember. I remember Klingler. I think I have cards of David Klingler. Honestly,
Yeah.
so like I do remember him. I remember watching the NFL, and I remember them always talking about him about 95, 96, 97. That's when I was kind of really into it, like as a kid. So I remember his name a lot. I don't remember, obviously, don't remember that season, but I always, when I see like historical stats, he's always up there. And I do remember when Colt Brennan broke the passing touchdown record. It was Klingler's record that he broke. So I do remember the name isn't foreign to me.
Yeah, we could have brought on John Lobb, the scholar, and someone who's a little older has the experience of watching him in college. But maybe next time.
Exactly.
Number one, as Zach referenced earlier, Lamar Jackson. He was number one and number four on the list. In 2016, he had 551.7 fantasy points for a total of 42.4 a game. He had almost the exact same percentage of fantasy points through the air, 48%. He threw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 9 picks, 1,571 rushing yards, and 21 more touchdowns on the ground. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable at how his like that season. If you had him, like you almost won every matchup based on his performance.
Yep.
Like you were hoping he got hurt. Like I don't want anybody to get hurt, but like you were hoping, like God, I hope this guy just gets hurt so I don't have to deal with him because if he plays, I'm done. I'm gonna lose.
Yeah, it's so funny. But all right. So next up, please leave any comments that you have. Feel free to reach out to Zach or myself, and we'll be happy to slice up this data any way that we can. But we'll be launching running backs next, which number one, if you weren't born yet, Zach, for number one, but you could probably guess who's number
Oh, I
one.
already know who number one is. I think we talked on the phone the other day about it. Like,
Yeah.
People. You know what? I'll save it for that. But
Yes.
we'll talk about it when we do it. But
yeah, a must watch, obviously.
it's just insane.
And then receivers, the data has not been built yet, but that'll be worked on soon. I can't wait to see where people like Randy Moss fall, Peter Warwick, some other people that are just highlight guys that you grew up watching. It's fun to see a lot of these old names like Steve Young, etc. See where they land a list, but that's all coming out. Then we'll be heavily into our, after signing day, we'll be getting into our impact freshmen. We'll be getting into our early 2022 rankings by position and mock drafts and all the exciting stuff that comes with spring football. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Much more to come, and we'll talk soon.
Sure.
Zach, appreciate you, bro.
Later, man.
See ya.